The tea was the right temperature. That's what stopped me cold. Charlotte carried it across the living room with both hands, the way a nurse would. Slow, deliberate, careful. She set it on the side table and straightened the blanket across my lap, without being asked. The mug was my favorite, the old blue one with the chipped handle Marion bought at a craft fair in 2009. Small amount of honey, just the way I liked it. My daughter has never once remembered how I take my tea, not in 38 years. I wrapped both hands around the mug and looked up at her face. She had been wearing that expression for 6 weeks, soft, worried, devoted, the expression of a daughter sacrificing everything to care for her grieving father. Drink it while it's warm, Dad. I looked down at the mug. Something in my chest went very still. Thank you, sweetheart, I said. I didn't drink it. She didn't notice that I've never told this story to anyone outside of a courtroom, but I'm telling it here because someone needs to hear it. If you want to follow it all the way through, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what comes next, because who I am changes everything you just witnessed. My name is Jonathan Langford. I am 63 years old. I spent 30 years as a DEA forensic chemist, identifying controlled substances, heavy metals, and synthetic poisons in federal narcotics cases. I testified in 94 federal trials. I identified 23 different compounds from samples no bigger than a thumbnail. I know what thallium acetate does to a human body. I know the timeline, the symptoms, the dosing patterns. I know the difference between natural neurological decline and something being deliberately introduced from outside. I recognize my own symptoms in week 2, the tingling in my fingers and toes, the heavy fatigue behind my eyes, the slow hair loss I had been blaming on grief. I sat with those symptoms for 3 days, running the numbers away I had on hundreds of federal cases. Then I understood exactly what I was looking at. The only question I hadn't answered was how far my own daughter was willing to go. I was going to find out. Marion's father built this ranch in 1952. He cut the timber himself from trees on the property and milled it with second-hand equipment bought from a closing operation in Great Falls. He built the main house beam by beam over 2 full summers. Marion grew up here. She raised Charlotte in these rooms. When the cancer took her 18 months ago, we buried her on the eastern ridge beside her parents. Facing the mountain she looked at every morning of her life. I walk that ridge every day at dawn. Not because it helps with the grief. It doesn't. Nothing does. I do it anyway because it is the last place Marion still exists in any form I can touch. Charlotte knows what this land means to me. She chose to come after it anyway. That single fact told me everything I needed to know about the kind of fight I was really in. And it told me I could not afford a single mistake. 3 days after I first noticed the tea, I found a business card on the kitchen counter tucked under the sugar bowl, like it belonged there. Karen Howell, Howell Property Group, Billings. Charlotte said Karen was an old friend who stopped by while I was napping. Just catching up. She said it the way people say things they have rehearsed. I told her I didn't remember hearing the door. You were sleeping pretty deeply, Dad. You've been so exhausted lately. I turned the card over. Karen Howell had written on the back in neat blue ink. 3 lines. 340 acres. Main house, 2 outbuildings. Comps running $2.1 million. I set the card back under the sugar bowl exactly as I had found it. That night, I lay in the dark and thought about those 3 lines. Karen Howell hadn't stopped by to catch up with a friend. She had come to see what she was going to be selling. The card was still there in the morning. I left it exactly where it was. That night, after Charlotte went to bed, I went to the garage. In the back corner, behind a box of Marion's gardening books, I had a case of specimen jars from my DEA days. Marion always said I would never need them again. I never got rid of them. I transferred a portion of the stored tea into a sealed jar and labeled it in block handwriting. Sample 1, Day 43. I had been quietly collecting and disposing of Charlotte's preparations for 2 weeks. 7 samples already. The next morning I drove into Billings and told Charlotte I needed supplies. I went to a FedEx office on the south end of town and overnighted a package to Dr. Raymond Schultz at the Montana State Crime Lab. Raymond and I had worked 3 federal cases together. He owed me favors. More importantly, he knew how to stay quiet. I drove home, made my own coffee from my own supplies, and waited. I started shuffling when I walked. Not dramatically, just a slight hesitation before each step, like a man whose joints were beginning to fail. A half-second pause before answering questions. Asking Charlotte what day it was when I knew perfectly well. She documented all of it. I figured that out on day 3. After each confused moment, she would pick up her phone and type quickly, not texting, logging, building a paper trail of my decline, the same way a case agent builds a federal file. Methodical, patient. She wasn't just poisoning me. She was constructing a medical history. Every trembling hand, every repeated question, every moment I seemed to forget, she recorded it all. The picture she was painting was of a man who could no longer manage his own life, a man who needed someone to step in and take control of everything. I shuffled a little more and asked her what month it was. She answered gently and typed it all down. I called Pete Harmon on my drive into Billings. Pete had spent 12 years doing financial investigations with the DA before going private in Denver. Careful, discreet, and thorough. Exactly what I needed. I gave him Charlotte's full name and asked him to pull whatever he could find quietly. He called back in 4 days. The numbers were serious. Charlotte owed $340,000 across 4 creditors, 2 personal loans from separate banks, a collapsed business line of credit from her failed interior design company, a civil judgment from a former client who sued over a botched renovation. Her husband Boyd knew about roughly $80,000 of it. The remaining $260,000 she had been managing in secret for more than 2 years. One creditor had already begun placing a lien against her personal assets. I read Pete's email twice, deleted it, committed every number to memory. $340,000. I had spent 30 years watching what people would do for far less than that. Boyd drove up from Billings every Sunday with their son Garrett. Garrett was 9 years old and liked to follow me around the ranch asking questions about the creek, the animals, why the sky looked different before rain. I made sure to be visibly worse on Sundays. Slower, quieter. Once I pretended to forget Boyd's name for 30 full seconds, watching his face go red while he looked to Charlotte for help. She moved in with practiced concern. "It's Boyd, Dad. You know Boyd." I apologized slowly and patted his arm. Charlotte watched with an expression she believed looked like grief. I had spent 30 years reading faces across federal interrogation tables. I knew exactly what genuine grief looked like. What was on her face was not grief. It was relief. Quiet, controlled, private relief. The kind that flickers for just a second before a person pulls it back. Boyd didn't see it. I filed it away with everything else I was building. Raymond called at 6:47 in the morning on a Thursday. He used his personal cell, not his lab line. That told me everything before he said a word. He spoke the way lab men speak when results are serious. Quiet, precise, no wasted words. Thallium acetate. Present in all 7 samples. Levels increasing incrementally across the collection period. The dosing was consistent with deliberate, gradual administration. Sublethal amounts designed to produce progressive symptoms over months without triggering any acute crisis. Designed to look like natural decline. Tasteless, odorless. Available online if you knew where to look. Raymond asked if I wanted him to file an official report. I said not yet. I thanked him, ended the call, and stood at my kitchen window watching the morning light move across Marion's mountains. Thallium acetate. My daughter had researched this specifically, a compound designed to make her father look like he was simply getting old and falling apart. She had done her homework. So had I. I told Charlotte I had a doctor's appointment in Billings. I did not go to any doctor. I went to Frank Aldridge's office on 27th Street. Frank was my estate attorney. 8 months after Marion died, while still deep in grief but clear-headed enough to act, Frank had helped me restructure everything into an irrevocable trust. The ranch, the retirement accounts, Marion's jewelry, all placed under terms that could not be changed without my written consent as sole trustee. Charlotte was listed as a beneficiary, under specific conditions only. I needed Frank to confirm one clause. If a beneficiary was convicted of any crime involving the trust or the trustee, their interest transferred permanently to the Montana Land Conservation Trust. He confirmed it without hesitation. I asked him to add one more clause. If Charlotte contested the trust through any legal action, the ranch would transfer to University of Montana's Environmental Sciences program in Marion's name permanently. Frank wrote it down without asking why. I have always been a light sleeper. Marion used to say I slept like a man waiting for something to go wrong. She was right. 20 minutes after going to bed, Charlotte's voice drifted up from the kitchen, low and tight. She thought I was out for the night. I sat up in the dark and listened without moving. It's moving slower than I expected. A pause. No doctor has been officially involved yet. I've been managing things at home. A longer pause. Boyd doesn't need to know yet. The property is worth exactly what I told you. Her voice dropped lower. I just need a little more time. The call ended. I lay back down with my hands folded on my chest and stared at the ceiling. I had already known. The evidence had been building for weeks. But hearing it in her voice, in the kitchen of the house Marion's father built with his own hands, was a different thing entirely. That was the night I stopped feeling anything like doubt. Garrett found me on the eastern ridge on a Sunday afternoon. He walked up through the dry autumn grass without being called and sat beside Marion's headstone like it was the most natural thing in the world. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then he looked at me with those serious eyes and asked, "Grandpa, are you going to die?" I looked at this 9-year-old boy, Marion's grandson, with her directness and her habit of asking the question that mattered most. "Not yet, buddy," I said. "Not for a long time." He nodded, satisfied, and asked if we could go look at the creek. I stood up, no shuffle, no hesitation, just a man rising on his own land, and said, "Lead the way." That evening I called Frank Aldridge and had Garrett added to a separate education trust. Sealed, untouchable under any circumstance. No matter what happened to Charlotte, that boy's future was protected. Some things you do not leave to chance, and if you're still here, you already understand this isn't just my story. Subscribe so you're there when it all comes down. Because I promise you, the ending was worth every single day of those 89. I called Diane Marsh on a Wednesday morning and asked her to meet me at a coffee shop on Montana Avenue in Billings. Diane was a special agent with the FBI's Billings field office. We had worked together on 3 federal cases in the late 2000s. Sharp, meticulous, patient, the kind of agent who didn't move until every piece was exactly where it needed to be. I brought my own thermos. I laid everything on the table. Raymond's lab results, Pete's financial report, Karen Howell's card with the handwritten property numbers, a recording of Charlotte's late-night kitchen call, 43 days of documented sample collection with dates, times, and chain of custody notes in my block handwriting. Diane listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she looked at me steadily. "Jonathan, this is attempted murder." "I know," I said. "I need it completely airtight before anyone moves." She studied the documents for a long moment. "Give me 2 weeks," she said. I refilled my cup and said, "Take 3. Charlotte announced she had made me an appointment with a neurologist in Billings, Dr. Neil Pratt, a cognitive specialist at St. Vincent Healthcare. She framed it as concern, warm voice, gentle reasoning. I recognized it immediately as the next layer of her plan, a formal cognitive assessment to support a guardianship petition, a piece of paper saying Jonathan Langford could no longer manage his own affairs. I agreed to go without hesitation. In the car, I played my role the entire drive, confused, tired, repeating the same question twice. Charlotte made notes on her phone at every red light. In the examination room, while Charlotte stepped outside to take a call, I handed Dr. Pratt a sealed envelope from Frank Aldridge. It explained the legal situation clearly and asked that findings be reported directly to the FBI contact listed inside. Dr. Pratt read it twice. His face stayed calm. When Charlotte returned, the appointment continued normally. She left satisfied. Dr. Pratt left with Diane Marsh's card in his coat pocket. I had a second cell phone. Prepaid. Bought with cash at a gas station in Laurel. Same move I had used on undercover operations back in 1987. Diane called it on a Friday afternoon. Her team had traced the thallium acetate to an online chemical supply company that had shipped a quantity 11 weeks earlier to a P.O. box in Billings. The box was registered under a name that didn't exist. The billing address connected to a credit card opened 6 months ago. The application listed Charlotte's Social Security number. Diane's voice stayed level. We're building the federal case. Attempted murder. Elder financial abuse. Fraud. I need 3 more weeks of documentation to make the timeline unbreakable. Can you give me that? I looked out the kitchen window at the empty driveway. I can give you that, I said. I put the prepaid phone away, walked back inside, and asked Charlotte what she felt like cooking for dinner. She smiled and said soup. I sat down and thanked her. I found Marion's jewelry box moved. She had always kept it on the high shelf in the master closet, pushed to the left side. Always, without variation. One of those small habits built over 27 years of marriage that you never consciously notice until someone disturbs it. The box had been shifted 8 inches to the right. I stood in the dark closet holding it. Marion's mother's pearls, her grandmother's gold brooch, the sapphire ring I gave Marion on our 25th anniversary. I thought about my daughter standing in the same closet, going through these same pieces, calculating what each one was worth. I put the box back exactly where Marion kept it. Left side, pushed to the edge. Then I walked to the kitchen, made coffee from my own supplies, and sat at the table without turning on any lights. I sat there for a long time. I didn't need to move. Everything was already in motion. Diane called on a Monday with news that stopped me cold. Charlotte had filed a preliminary guardianship petition in Yellowstone County District Court. She was citing cognitive decline and inability to manage financial affairs. The petition included a signed statement from a Dr. Alan Foss, a Billings physician I had never once seen, attesting to symptoms of dementia. She had moved faster than anyone anticipated. A court hearing was scheduled 6 weeks out. If the petition succeeded before Diane's team was ready to move, Charlotte would gain legal control over everything. The trust, the ranch, the accounts, all subject to a court-appointed guardian. She's accelerating, Diane said. She's nervous, I said. Something shifted and she knows it. That makes her more dangerous. I already knew that. In 30 years of federal work, nothing made people more reckless than the feeling that their window was closing. I told Diane I needed Pete to dig into Alan Foss immediately. We had less time than we had planned. Pete came back on Alan Foss in 48 hours. Foss had lost his hospital privileges at Billings Clinic in 2019, fraudulent insurance billing, confirmed by internal audit. He now ran a small private practice. Cash only, no hospital affiliation. Over 3 years, Foss had appeared as a paid expert witness in 4 separate Yellowstone County guardianship cases. He testified for petitioner every time. He found cognitive decline every time. The payment connected to my assessment came through a cash transfer from an account in Charlotte's financial trail. The amount was $8,500. She had paid a discredited doctor $8,500 to sign a paper saying her father had dementia. I read Pete's report and set on Frank Aldridge's desk without a word. Frank studied it carefully. I'll add him to the filing, he said. Do that, I said. I drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon light. The fields were going gold. I didn't say a word to anyone for the rest of that evening. Boyd called on a Thursday evening. His voice was tight and careful, like a man handling something he wasn't sure how to hold without it breaking. He had found something in Charlotte's email. A thread with Karen Howell about the ranch listing. Wire transfers to an offshore account he didn't recognize. Messages with someone referred to only as AF. Boyd had spent 2 hours figuring out those initials stood for Alan Foss. His voice cracked once. Just once. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. He asked what he should do. I thought about Garrett sitting beside Marion's headstone on the eastern ridge, asking if his grandfather was going to die. Come to Billings Monday. I said, bring every email, every transfer record. Do not tell her. Boyd went quiet for a long moment. She's my wife, he said. I know, Boyd, I said. There was nothing else to add to that. Ted Vance was Charlotte's attorney. On a Thursday morning, his office sent a formal letter to Frank Aldridge demanding a complete financial accounting of my assets as part of the guardianship discovery process. Frank responded within the hour. He provided exactly what the law required. Confirmation that an irrevocable trust existed, that I was sole trustee, and that the trust terms were not subject to disclosure in any proceeding where fraud had been alleged by the trustee himself. Ted Vance called Frank directly 40 minutes later. His voice was several degrees colder. "What fraud allegation?" he asked. Frank's voice stayed completely even. "You'll want to advise your client to retain criminal counsel immediately, Ted." For full seconds of silence on the line. Frank told me later he counted every one. That same afternoon, Diane called to say the U.S. attorney had reviewed the complete file and was ready to authorize all charges. They needed one final documented act to seal the timeline permanently. We were nearly there. Charlotte arrived at the ranch at 7 on a Friday morning, unannounced. She had never done that before. I was already at the kitchen table with my coffee, my own supplies, locked in my truck overnight. She came through the door and stopped when she saw me. For a moment, we just looked at each other across Marion's kitchen. The softness that had been on her face for 6 weeks was gone. What was underneath was harder, frightened, calculating fast. She wasn't here to threaten me. She was here to read me, to figure out how much I knew and whether she still had any time left at all. I smiled at her the same slow, gentle way she had been smiling at me for weeks. "Sit down, sweetheart," I said. "Let me make you some tea." She didn't sit. She looked around the kitchen, looked at me, looked at the counter. She left 15 minutes later, with shaking hands. I watched her card disappear without moving from my chair. After Charlotte left, I found on the counter a smoothie, blended smooth and covered with plastic wrap, a yellow post-it note in her handwriting. "Good for your energy, Dad." I stood and looked at it for a moment. Then I pulled on a latex glove, lifted the wrap carefully, and filled a specimen jar with a measured sample. I sealed it, labeled it Sample 31, Day 89, and photographed it in place before moving it. Full chain of custody, exactly as I had done it on federal cases for 30 years. Then I called Diane on the prepaid phone. She picked up on the first ring. "The warrant is ready," she said before I could speak. "The U.S. attorney signed off yesterday. Attempted murder, elder financial exploitation, fraud, conspiracy to commit forgery. We've been waiting on one final documented act to complete the timeline." I looked at Sample 31 sitting on my kitchen counter. "Come get it," I said. The FBI arrived at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning. I was on the eastern ridge at Marion's headstone when my phone lit up with a live feed from the doorbell camera I had installed 3 weeks earlier without telling anyone. For agents, 2 sheriff's vehicles. Diane Marsh moving in the lead with that quiet, controlled certainty I had seen her use on federal operations 15 years ago. I watched Charlotte open the door in her robe. I watched her face move through every stage I had seen on 100 faces in 30 years of federal work. Confusion, disbelief, rapid calculation, then collapse, the kind that starts in the shoulders and moves through the whole body at once like something giving way. I heard her say my name twice through the phone speaker, high and fractured. I turned the screen off. I looked out at Marion's mountains in the early morning light. The sky was turning gold above the ridge where 3 generations of her family rested. I stayed up there until every vehicle was gone. By end of business that Tuesday, Ted Vance had formally withdrawn as Charlotte's attorney. Dr. Alan Foss surrendered his medical license under the threat of federal prosecution and signed a full cooperation agreement before the week was out. Boyd filed for divorce on Wednesday and moved Garrett to his mother's house in Laurel, where the boy would have a yard and a school that didn't know any of this yet. The guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice by the Yellowstone County District Court on Thursday. The judge's written order used words like fraudulent, malicious, and deliberate premeditation. At arraignment, Charlotte entered a not guilty plea in a voice the transcript described as barely audible. The federal judge denied bail without hesitation. Nearly a full year of documented premeditation made the decision straightforward. I was not in the courtroom. I was at the ranch fixing fence on the north pasture that had needed work since October. The wire was rusted through in 2 places. The posts were still solid. I finished before dark. 6 months later, Charlotte pleaded guilty to attempted murder and elder financial exploitation. 22 years federal. No parole for 14. The trust held. The ranch held. Marion's land stood exactly where her father placed it in 1952, steady through everything that had come for it. Garrett spent the whole following summer at the ranch. We fixed the barn roof together. He learned to read the creek for coming rain. On the last evening before Boyd came to collect him, we walked up to the eastern ridge and sat beside Marion's headstone until the sun dropped behind the mountains. Garrett asked if he could be buried up here someday. Near Marion, near the mountains. I put my hand on his shoulder. This ridge belongs to this family. I said, it'll be here. Some people look at a 63-year-old man living alone on a ranch and see a soft target. They see grief and age and isolation. And they do the math and like what they come up with. What they don't see is 30 years of knowing exactly what people are capable of. What they don't see is patience. Marion used to say I was the most patient man she had ever known. She meant it as a compliment. She was right. Don't underestimate the quiet ones. We've been watching longer than you know. That if the story meant something to you, it felt like a warning or a reminder that quiet people are rarely helpless. Subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And leave me a comment with one word. What would you have done that first morning when you noticed the tea was wrong? I read every single one.